I, 25M, grew up in Colorado in what seemed like a pretty normal middle-class family from the outside. But honestly, things at home were anything but normal. My brother Mike, 24M, was always my mom's favorite. You know how some kids can do no wrong in their parents' eyes? That was Mike. He could have done something ridiculous, and my mom would have found a way to spin it into something positive. Meanwhile, I was out here working construction with my uncle every summer starting at 16. Mike, on the other hand, got to focus on his art, which mostly meant hanging out in the basement smoking weed and trying to be a YouTuber. Mom always had excuses for him. He's just figuring himself out. Or he's sensitive, he needs space. But if I came home exhausted after a 12-hour shift and didn't jump right into helping with chores, I was suddenly lazy and irresponsible. Don't get me wrong, I had a pretty typical suburban upbringing in a lot of ways. I played football in high school and even made it to the state finals my senior year. We probably would have won if our quarterback hadn't hurt his ankle. On weekends, I'd hang out in the garage with my dad working on cars. That was my escape from Mom constantly comparing me to Mike. My sister Emma, 22F, was the brainy one, always buried in a book. She was my dad's favorite, but not in the weird, over-the-top way Mom favored Mike. It was more like they just clicked. She'd help him with crossword puzzles while I was out in the garage with him. It worked, you know? College was where I really started to outshine Mike, though Mom would never admit it. I worked my butt off studying civil engineering at Colorado State and even took construction jobs on weekends to avoid student loans. Meanwhile, Mike dropped out of community college after 2 semesters because, according to him, the system was too limiting for his creativity, or whatever excuse Mom went along with that week. But I kept pushing, got decent grades, made good friends, and landed a solid job at a big commercial construction company right after graduation. The pay wasn't huge at first, but it was good for my age, especially in Colorado. Plus, I loved that I got to work on real buildings instead of being stuck at a desk all day. That's where I met Rachel. She was doing her student teaching at the elementary school next to one of our construction sites. I'd see her during lunch breaks, sitting outside with her kids during recess. One day, a kid's ball rolled over to our site, and I brought it back. We started talking, and I really thought she was different, you know? She was studying to be a teacher, loved kids, came from a good family, basically everything I thought I wanted. Mom adored her from the start, which, looking back, should have been my first red flag. She was always inviting Rachel over for family dinners, even when I was working late. Rachel and Mike would spend hours chatting about movies and music while I was out there grinding, trying to build a future for us. "It's so nice that you and Mike get along so well," Mom would say, smiling like she'd orchestrated the whole thing. After 3 years together, I proposed last December. I had it all planned out. Took her to this spot in the mountains where we had our first real date, got down on one knee in the snow, the whole romantic setup. She said yes, and I really thought I had it all figured out. We even put a down payment on a cute little house near my parents' place. Rachel talked about wanting at least 3 kids and raising them close to family. "Your mom's going to be such an amazing grandmother," she'd say. But looking back now, the signs were all there, weren't they? I just didn't want to see them. Like how she'd always find reasons to hang out at my parents' house when I was working weekends, or how she and Mike had all these inside jokes I wasn't part of. Mom would even make these weird comments about how alike they were or how they just get each other on a different level. But you know how it is, you never want to believe the people closest to you could hurt you like that. I remember this one time, about a month before everything fell apart. We were all having dinner at my parents' place. Rachel was telling a story about something that happened at school, and Mike finished her sentence perfectly. They both laughed like it was the most natural thing in the world, while Mom sat there with this weird, satisfied smile. Dad and Emma exchanged this look across the table, but I was too caught up in thinking about work to notice what it meant. Honestly, I was completely blind to what was going on. So, this is where everything completely fell apart. It was a Tuesday in April. I remember that because we were supposed to pour concrete for a new office building, but the delivery got messed up, so we couldn't do anything until the next day. My boss told me to take the afternoon off. Normally, I'd stay and do paperwork, but I thought, why not surprise Rachel for lunch? She was always saying I worked too much. I got home around 1 p.m. and saw Mike's crappy Jeep in the driveway, the one my parents bought him for his 21st birthday, even though he'd already wrecked 2 cars. I should have realized something was off because he was supposed to be at his part-time job at the music store, another thing my mom was helping him pay for, but I figured maybe he was on lunch break, stopping by to tell Rachel about his latest big idea. The front door was unlocked, and I could hear music playing upstairs, John Legend's All of Me. which was our engagement song. Kind of ironic, huh? There were clothes scattered on the stairs, his old band t-shirt and her teacher sweater, the one I'd given her for Christmas. You know that moment in movies where everything just stops and time feels like it's dragging? That's exactly how it felt. I just stood there, staring at that sweater on the stairs, like it was some glaring sign pointing to what was going on in our bedroom. I'm not going to describe what I saw when I opened the door. You can guess. But what really got me was that they didn't even notice me at first. They were so caught up in their own little world. When they finally saw me, Mike actually said, "Oh, bro," like he just spilled a drink or something. Rachel immediately started crying, pulling the sheets around her, saying, "Oh God, over and over." Mike just sat there, looking at me with this mix of guilt and, I don't know, almost relief, like he was glad it was finally out in the open. I didn't say a word. No yelling, no punching, even though I was boiling inside. I just turned around, walked downstairs, and sat in my truck for about an hour, trying to process what I'd just seen. Eventually, they both came out. Mike practically bolted to his Jeep, and Rachel stood on the porch in her robe, her mascara smeared all over her face. I waited until Mike was gone, then went back inside. "How long?" That's all I asked. She tried to avoid answering, talking about how it just happened, and how she never meant to hurt me. But I kept pressing her. "How long?" Finally, she admitted it. 2 years. 2 years. Since right after I started working weekends to save up for her engagement ring. All those Saturdays I spent working overtime, thinking I was building our future, she was with him. Every time she said she was grading papers or working on lesson plans, she was with him. Even when she went to my parents' house to help Mom with gardening. Yeah, you can guess what was really going on. The worst part? She actually tried to explain herself. She sat on our couch, the one I'd spent 3 paychecks on because she said it was perfect for our future family, and told me how she'd developed feelings for Mike over time. She said they had this deep connection through music and art that she and I never had, and that she still loved me but was in love with him. I told her she had until the end of the day to pack her things and leave. She started crying again, saying she needed more time, that we should talk it out. But I just walked out, drove to Home Depot, and bought new locks. By the time I got back, she was gone. But she'd left a note. I still have it somewhere. 5 pages of her apologizing, saying she never meant for this to happen, and how Mike made her feel understood in a way I never did. I called my boss, told him I needed a few days off, and spent the next 2 days changing all my passwords. Bank accounts, social media, everything. I blocked both their numbers. The only reason I even found out what happened next was because my sister, Emma, told me later. Apparently, Rachel went straight to my parents' house, found my mom in the garden, of course, and broke down crying, confessing everything. And what did my mom do? She hugged her, told her everything happens for a reason, and that maybe this was for the best. She even made Rachel stay for dinner. My mom made dinner for my fiancé the same day she found out she'd been cheating with my brother. Mike showed up too, probably after Rachel called him, and gave this whole speech about how they didn't choose this, how love just happens, and how they wanted to tell me but didn't know how. My mom just sat there, nodding along like this was some romantic drama, while my dad stared at his plate. Emma was the only one who had any sense. She stormed out. At first, Rachel moved in with her parents, but within a week, she was staying every night at my parents' house, in my old room with my brother. And my mom was totally fine with it. In fact, she seemed happy about it. Later, I found out she'd been pushing them together, telling my brother Mike that Rachel was more his type, and telling Rachel how much they had in common. The next few days are a bit hazy in my memory. I remember Emma coming over with pizza and sitting with me while I swung between being furious and feeling completely empty. She told me Mom was already talking about when things calmed down and how we'd all laugh about this someday. Yeah, sure. That weekend, Rachel emailed me asking to figure out how to split our shared stuff. I told her to take whatever she wanted. I didn't want anything that reminded me of her anyway. She took most of the furniture, including that couch, and left me with an empty apartment and an engagement ring I'm still paying for. After the initial shock and Rachel moving out, that's when the mind games really started. My mom began this, I don't even know what to call it, this effort to make everything seem normal. She'd casually bring up how natural Mike and Rachel's connection was, how she'd always noticed something special between them. She started bringing up old memories of them together, twisting the past to make their betrayal seem like some destined love story. Remember that music festival they went to 2 years ago? The one mom talked me out of going to because I needed to focus on my career? Yeah, turns out that's when they first got together. Mom knew. She'd been pushing them to spend time together because Rachel brought out a better side of Mike. Meanwhile, I was working 60-hour weeks trying to save up for a house, a wedding, and the future I thought we were building. The worst part? Mom started hinting that maybe this was all my fault. You were always so focused on work, she'd say. Or, Rachel needed someone who could understand her creative side. Like my mistake was working hard to build a life instead of sitting around in the basement smoking weed and figuring myself out like Mike. Then, this supervisor job opened up at our Texas branch. The pay was way better, like a lot. And honestly, I needed a way out. The day I found out about it, I also found out that Mom had helped Rachel move some of her stuff into Mike's room, my old room. The same room where I'd spent so many nights studying while Mike was out partying. The room where I'd planned my future with Rachel. And now they were sleeping in there together, with Mom acting like it was the best thing ever. I didn't tell anyone about the job at first. I just kept it to myself while I watched my family go out of their way to make Mike and Rachel feel comfortable. Like they hadn't completely betrayed me. Emma was the only one who seemed to get how messed up it all was. But even she started to cave under Mom's pressure. Maybe we should try to see their side, she said one day, avoiding eye contact. That's when I knew I had to leave. But before I could tell anyone about moving, Thanksgiving rolled around. And oh man, it was a disaster. I walked into my parents' house, and there they were. Mike and Rachel sitting at the kitchen table like everything was fine. Rachel was wearing the sweater I'd bought her last Christmas, looking all comfortable and at home. Mike had his arm around her chair, and Mom was grinning at them like they were some perfect couple. The second I walked in, the room went dead silent. You know, that awkward kind of quiet where you can feel the tension in the air. Then Mom starts this rehearsed speech about healing as a family and learning to forgive. Dad just sat there nodding along, and Emma, poor Emma, was sitting with them, giving me this guilty look. That's when Mom dropped the news. She'd invited Rachel's parents too. She wanted to bring the families together because Mike and Rachel were getting serious. Getting serious. Like they hadn't been sneaking around behind my back for 2 years. Like they hadn't wrecked every plan I'd made for the future. Seeing Mike and Rachel sitting there at my parents' table, acting like they belonged, was the last straw. It was like everything suddenly became clear, like that moment when you're drunk and then instantly sober. I just snapped. I walked out without saying a word. Mom was calling after me, going on about family and healing and whatever else she'd practiced. But I didn't stop. I got in my truck and drove to McDonald's. Sitting there eating a Big Mac on Thanksgiving sounds pretty pathetic, right? But honestly, that sad little meal in my truck felt better than sitting at that table, watching my family pretend everything was fine while they passed the gravy to the people who ruined my life. So, there I was, sitting in McDonald's on Thanksgiving, surrounded by the only other people who had nowhere better to be. I started jotting down a list on my phone, everything I needed to do to just vanish. Not in a dramatic witness protection kind of way, but enough to leave this whole mess behind. I already had the Texas job lined up. My boss had been practically begging me to take it. The company was growing fast down there, and they needed someone who knew how to handle big projects. The next morning, I went straight to the bank. I opened a new account at a totally different bank and moved every cent from my joint accounts. Luckily, Rachel and I never got around to merging all our finances. The bank teller gave me this look like she knew exactly what was up. Turns out her ex had emptied their joint account when he left, so she made sure everything was done by the book. Then came the phone. Did you know that if you're on a family plan, the main account holder can see every call and text you make? Yeah, my mom had been using that to keep an eye on me for years. I switched to a different carrier, got a new number, a new phone, the whole deal. The guy at the store helped me transfer all my important stuff without tying it to my old accounts. Social media was next. Before I deleted everything, I saved all my photos and important messages. Then I started blocking people. Mike, Rachel, my mom, my dad, their friends, their families. Basically anyone who'd taken their side. I left Emma blocked but unfriended her. She was still on the fence, and I didn't have the energy to deal with that. I changed my email and set up new social media accounts under a different name for work stuff. The apartment situation was a bit tricky. I still had 4 months left on the lease, but my landlord was surprisingly understanding. Turns out he'd been through something similar with his brother years ago, so he let me break the lease with just a 1-month penalty. I started packing that same night. I got rid of anything Rachel and I had bought together. That couch she left behind? I listed it for free on Craigslist, and some college kids came and picked it up within an hour. I was supposed to start the Texas job in January, But I called my boss and told him I needed to start earlier. I made up some excuse about wanting to get settled before the holidays. He was thrilled, said they needed help ASAP anyway. I found an apartment in Houston through a guy at work, signed the lease online, and paid the deposit that same day. The next week was a whirlwind of packing and planning. I only told 2 people what I was doing, my best friend from the construction crew and my old foreman. They helped me load the U-Haul without asking too many questions. My foreman even gave me a heads up that my mom had been calling the office, looking for me. The irony. While I was packing, my mom kept trying to set up this big family meeting to work things out. She left voicemails about how we needed to heal together and how running away from problems doesn't solve them. It was pretty rich coming from her, considering she'd been ignoring reality for years, acting like her favorite child could do no wrong. The day I left, December 15th, was freezing cold. Frost covered the windows, and you could see your breath in the air. Felt fitting in a way. I got up at 4 a.m., loaded the last few boxes, and hit the road before sunrise. I didn't leave a note or say goodbye to anyone. I just got in my truck with the U-Haul attached and started driving south. My mom must have figured out something was up pretty quickly because, by the time I reached Kansas, my phone was flooded with messages from random relatives. Apparently, she'd gone to my apartment, found it empty, and started calling everyone she could think of, crying about how I'd abandoned the family and how she was worried sick. I didn't stop. I just kept driving. Somewhere in Oklahoma, I got a random friend request on Instagram from an account I didn't recognize. Turns out it was my mom trying to be sneaky. Her message was something like, "Why did you move without telling us? We're your family. We miss you and need you home for the holidays. We can figure this out together." I fired back with the most satisfying reply I've ever written. "You only have one son left. I'm not part of that family anymore." Then I blocked her new account and kept driving. I made it to Texas that night and checked into a hotel because I was too exhausted to deal with moving into my apartment. I lay there in that plain hotel room, staring at the ceiling, and you know what? For the first time in months, I actually slept through the whole night. No stress dreams, no waking up mad, just peace. Later, I found out Mom completely lost it when she read my message. She started calling everyone in the family, crying about how her baby boy was making reckless decisions and how she'd failed as a mother. "Yeah, no, you did fail, Mom. Just not in the way you think." So, there I was in Texas, finally starting to build a decent life for myself. I got promoted to project manager within 3 months. Turns out, when you're not drowning in family drama, you can actually focus on work. I bought myself a new F-150, the kind my brother Mike always wanted but couldn't afford because artists don't care about material things. I started training in MMA at a local gym. Figured I needed a healthy way to deal with all the anger. And for the first time in forever, I was sleeping through the night without waking up wanting to punch a wall. Then it happened. It was a Wednesday in January when I got the call. I was on site going over plans with my foreman when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but it had a Colorado area code. I almost didn't answer it. Honestly, I wish I hadn't. It was my Aunt Susan, Mom's sister, the only sane one in the family. She was crying, which immediately freaked me out because Aunt Susan never cries. She told me Mom had been diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer, terminal. 3 months to live, maybe less. She said Mom was asking for me, wanted to make peace before, I sat in my truck for an hour after that call, just staring blankly, not really seeing anything. I called my boss, told him I needed a few days off, and booked a flight back to Colorado for the next morning. I even packed a suit because, well, I thought the worst. The whole flight back, I couldn't stop thinking about Mom. Sure, she'd completely screwed up with the whole Mike and Rachel situation, but she was still my mom. I started remembering the good times, her cheering at my football games, making my favorite soup when I was sick, teaching me how to drive in that old Subaru. By the time the plane landed, I talked myself into believing this might be a chance to fix things before it was too late. Aunt Susan picked me up at the airport. I should have realized something was wrong when she wouldn't look me in the eye. She said Mom was at home and wanted to see me right away. I walked into that house, the one I grew up in, the one I hadn't stepped foot in since Thanksgiving, and there they all were. Mom, Dad, Mike, Rachel, Emma, even Rachel's parents. No hospital bed, no medical equipment. Mom was standing there, looking perfectly healthy in her favorite gardening sweater. The room was dead silent. Mom started crying, her fake cry, the kind where she makes sure everyone sees her tears, saying she had to do something to get me home, that she couldn't stand having the family torn apart. Mike and Rachel were holding hands, looking guilty but also weirdly smug, like they thought this was going to magically fix everything. You know that moment in movies where the hero just snaps, when everything becomes crystal clear, and they're eerily calm? That's exactly what happened. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and saw her for what she was. A manipulative, toxic woman who'd spent my whole life coddling one son while tearing the other down. You faked having cancer. I said it so quietly they had to lean in to hear me. You faked terminal cancer just to manipulate me into coming back. Mom tried to explain herself, saying things like, sometimes you have to do extreme things in tough situations, and a mom will go to any lengths to keep her family together. Rachel actually seemed to agree, like this made sense somehow. Mike just kept his eyes on the floor, probably thinking about how he could use all this drama for his bad poetry. Dad finally chimed in, trying to smooth things over like he always does. Son, your mom just wants to make things right. We all miss you. Mike and Rachel are engaged now, and we need to figure out how to be a family again. That's when I snapped. Not in an angry way, I was past that. I just started laughing and couldn't stop. Here was my family, who had betrayed me in every way imaginable, even lying about cancer, sitting there expecting me to just go along with their messed up fantasy. I looked at each of them one by one. You know what's funny? I actually felt guilty on the plane. I was thinking about all the good times, wondering if I'd been too hard on you. But this, I waved my hand around the room. This is actually a gift, because now I know for sure that I was right to cut you all out of my life. Mom started crying, real messy crying, the kind she usually hides because it ruins her makeup. Mike stood up, probably to pull some brotherly act, but I just held up my hand to stop him. The only reason I came back was because I thought my mom was dying. Congrats, Mom. You just destroyed any chance of us ever having a relationship again. I turned and walked out. I could hear them calling after me. Mom's sobs getting louder and more frantic. Rachel even tried to follow me, saying something about understanding my pain. I didn't stop. I just kept walking. Aunt Susan was waiting in her car, crying, for real this time. Turns out Mom had tricked her too, telling her I was suicidal and needed an intervention. She said the cancer story was the only way to get me to come home. Classic Mom, playing with everyone's emotions to get what she wants. I called an Uber, went straight to the airport, and caught the next flight back to Texas. I blocked every Colorado number in my phone, except Aunt Susan's. She'd earned the right to stay in touch after revealing Mom's lies. After the whole cancer lie, I buried myself in work and focused on building my new life in Texas. I started dating Sarah, this amazing woman I met at my MMA gym. She was nothing like Rachel. Independent, no nonsense, and had zero interest in family drama. She'd heard bits of my story from friends but never pressured me to talk about it. She just accepted me, flaws and all. Things with Sarah were going really well. She was a trauma nurse, worked long hours like I did, and understood the grind in a way Rachel never could. We'd been together almost a year when Christmas came around. Her family invited me to spend the holidays with them in Dallas. They were a normal, kind family, nothing like mine. Her dad, a retired firefighter, actually cared about hearing about my construction projects. Her mom kept piling ham on my plate, refusing to take no for an answer. Felt good. Real. Christmas Eve was perfect. Sarah's mom made this amazing fettuccine alfredo, their family tradition. We exchanged gifts, watched old Christmas movies, and for the first time in years, I thought maybe I could have this kind of normal family life again. I should have known it wouldn't last. Christmas morning started off just as great. More food, more presents, more of that warm, family feeling I'd been missing. Then Sarah's mom casually mentioned they were expecting some family friends for dinner. I didn't think much of it at first. I even helped set up extra chairs in the dining room. Then, around 4 p.m., the doorbell rang. Sarah's mom went to answer it, and I heard them before I saw them. My mother's voice, dripping with that fake sweetness she always used when she wanted to impress people. My stomach dropped. I turned around, and there they were, Mom, Dad, Emma, Mike, and Rachel, standing in the doorway like some twisted Christmas nightmare. That's when I saw Sarah's face. Not shocked, just guilty. She knew. She'd been in on this whole plan. Turns out she'd been talking to my mom for months, setting up this so-called intervention, because she thought she was doing the right thing. My mom had filled her head with stories about how everyone was so worried about me, how I was avoiding my problems, and how I needed family support to get better. Then my mom started her usual speech. What they did was wrong, but what you're doing isn't okay either. Like me leaving town was somehow the same as my brother sleeping with my fiancée for 2 years. My dad jumped in, saying enough is enough, and that Mike had suffered enough for his mistakes. Suffered? Really? He ended up with the girl, kept the family's support, and now I'm the one who's supposed to just move on. Rachel was there too, holding Mike's hand, flashing this shiny new engagement ring. I'm pretty sure it was paid for with the money from selling my old house, the one my mom talked them into buying as a couple after I left. Rachel tried to say something, probably some rehearsed line about how love works in mysterious ways or something equally ridiculous. I didn't let her finish. I looked straight at Sarah and said, "Find your own way home. I'll come get my stuff later." Short, calm, and final. Then everyone started talking at once. Sarah crying, my mom doing her dramatic gasping act, Mike trying to act like the peacekeeper when he had no right. As I walked out, my mom grabbed my arm and started going on about how the family name is so important, and how she raised me better than this. That's when I told her I'd already changed my last name months ago. You'd think I'd told her I killed someone. She literally fell into a chair, crying about family legacy and tradition. The drive back to Houston was long and quiet. I had a lot of time to think about how dumb I'd been to trust someone again. Sarah called me about 50 times that night, leaving voicemails about how she was just trying to help, and how she thought getting everyone together would fix things. Total manipulation. My mom had played her just like she plays everyone else. I got back to my apartment around 3 a.m. and saw the Christmas tree Sarah and I had decorated together, with all the presents still sitting underneath. I grabbed every gift she'd given me over the past year, threw them in a box, and added the spare key she'd left, her toothbrush from my bathroom. Everything. The next morning, I dropped it all off at her place before she got back from Dallas. The worst part? I found out later that this whole Christmas intervention had been planned for months. Sarah had been updating my mom on everything, where I was working, who I was hanging out with, even if I was dating anyone. She'd even helped them find my new address, which I'd kept private specifically to avoid this kind of drama. My mom had played Sarah like a pro, showing her old family photos, telling stories about how close we used to be, painting herself as this worried mother just trying to help her troubled son. And Sarah, wanting to be the hero who fixed everything, fell for it completely. Then, about a year later, my company won a big contract to demolish and rebuild a bunch of foreclosed properties in Colorado. Guess whose house was on the list? Yep, my parents' place. The same house my mom had remortgaged to pay for Mike and Rachel's dream wedding. The house where she'd hosted all those family dinners, pulled her little schemes, and welcomed my brother and ex into my old room. I volunteered to oversee the demolition myself. I drove up there on a Tuesday morning and watched as they tore it down, brick by brick. My mom showed up halfway through, probably tipped off by a neighbor. She looked old. Not just older, but tired and worn down. I found out later she's working as a Walmart greeter now, her first real job in 30 years. Guess karma has a sense of humor. But that's just the start. Through Emma, who finally grew a backbone and reached out to apologize, I got the full story on everyone's spectacular downfall. Mike and Rachel's marriage fell apart just 6 months in. Turns out Rachel has a habit of cheating. She was caught with Mike's best friend, the same guy who stood as his best man at their wedding. And to make it worse, she's now pregnant with his kid. This is the same Rachel who always said she couldn't have children. Mike didn't take it well. He started drinking too much, lost his job at the music store after showing up drunk too many times, and now he's stuck living in his mom's basement in their rundown rental. He spends his time writing sad songs about being betrayed, completely missing the irony of it all. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad split up. It came out that Mom had been lying about their money for years, secretly using credit cards in Dad's name to pay for Mike's stuff and the wedding. Dad only found out when they tried to refinance the house, and the bank turned them down. He's staying with my aunt now, finally going to therapy, and even called to apologize. He admitted he should have stood up to Mom a long time ago. As for Rachel, her teaching career is done. People found out about her history of getting involved with her students' relatives. Mike wasn't the first. No school will hire her now, so she's working at a call center and living with her new boyfriend and baby daddy in a shabby apartment. Her parents, who used to support her, following her heart, won't even talk to her anymore. But for me, things are actually looking up. About a year ago, I met this great woman named Molly at the grocery store. She's nothing like Rachel or my ex, Sarah. She's straightforward, honest, and actually has a sense of right and wrong. We moved in together 6 months ago, and she's pregnant with our first child. When she found out, she made it clear she didn't want anything to do with my family. She even blocked them all on social media before I could say anything. Life's good. Mom somehow found out about the baby. Small towns love to gossip, and sent me a box of my old baby stuff along with a long letter about family legacy and second chances. I kept the baby items since they were mine. But the letter? Straight into the trash. She even tried making new social media accounts to contact me, posting about how much she misses her firstborn and how a child needs their grandmother. I blocked every single one. Emma's getting married next month. She and Dad want to patch things up. Just the two of them, no Mom or Mike involved. They've both been in therapy, working on their own issues and how they contributed to everything that went down. Emma admitted she was too scared to stand up to Mom back then, and Dad finally owned up to how his passiveness let things spiral. Molly thinks it might be time to consider letting them back into my life, but she's not pressuring me. She's seen all the screenshots, read all the manipulative messages, and knows the whole story. She says she'll support whatever I decide, but also reminds me that people can change if they put in the work. And that's a big if. Honestly, though, watching karma finally catch up with everyone hasn't been as satisfying as I thought it would be. I expected to feel some kind of victory seeing them struggle, but instead, I just feel relief. Relief that I got out. Relief that I built my own life. Relief that I broke the cycle. Edit. For those asking about Dad and Emma, I still haven't decided if I'll go to the wedding. Some wounds take a lot longer to heal than others.